I was listening to a newer podcast the other day about theology and media.
David, by comparison, Popcorn Theology is a somewhat aged podcast. Am I not correct?
Would you call me an aged podcaster? Popcorn Theology's not old. No one would call her old. She has a growing list of hosts, lovely Patreons. She's a fine podcast, dissecting the narrative, loyal to her creator, and pointing the story back to him, if she's well handled. No, she's not old. She's in her prime.
In a world where entertainment is viewed as mindless diversion, only good for momentary distraction, one podcast has taken a stand, thoughtfully engaging the art of our day, dissecting the narrative, and pointing the people back to the greatest storyteller of all. You are about to enter a new world, and you will never view entertainment in the same way again. This is Popcorn Theology.
Welcome, movie lovers and theology nerds, to episode 318 of Popcorn Theology, where we examine films for where they align with the greatest story and our greatest storyteller.
Oh, come on.
The music faded. I couldn't keep up. Sorry.
That's so
I'm
good.
Captain Lee. But you can call me Lucky Dave.
And I'm Midshipman Maddie.
And I'm Lieutenant Eric. Thanks for joining us as we discuss what themes we can receive, reject, and redeem, and how we can use them for fruitful gospel conversation and mindful movie consumption.
Mm-hmm.
And today we are looking at Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World, if you haven't already figured that out from our amazing accents.
Yes. You're welcome,
This movie
Rory.
was... Yeah, this is all for you. This one was directed by Peter Weir and stars Russell Crowe, Paul Bettany, Billy Boyd, James D'Arcy, and the rest of the crew. And I don't know if you guys knew this, but Peter Weir directed Dead Poets Society and The Truman Show, which are also two of very favorites of mine.
Ooh.
Okay, interesting.
What widely varied movies. Oh my goodness, but very good. that's like when you look at James Mangold's background. It's like, oh, he did all these rom-coms and Walk the Line and Logan, evidently.
And Logan,
And Logan.
Quite
Saved his best for the comic book movie.
Yeah.
But no, so we are covering this because the Patreons asked for it. And believe it or not, this was something we just looked up before we recorded. We were recording on almost exactly the same day that this movie was released 20 years ago. So I was reading up a little bit of trivia on this outside of the Popcorn Theology group, where I think this has been in the running multiple times over the years, always coming up a vote or two short and then going away, then keeps coming back. But it was actually about 15 years in development. I forget the guy's name, but I looked it up earlier. He joked, he said, I had to become the president of 20th Century Fox to get this movie made because he was just a fan of the books. And he was for years, as a producer, he kept trying to get it, and could never get it. And then he had to become president to greenlight it. And then unfortunately it's a movie that has been around for a long time and keeps coming back into the cultural time. But at the time, it was just a nominal hit. It was like the 33rd, box office of the year or something like that.
Yeah. And I think from what I've read, it was the real shame for it, if you will, is that it just was poor timing. It came out in November of 2003. And during the summer of 2003, we got Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl.
Yep.
And so, I mean, in a sense, maybe some audiences were, I mean, in a sense, if you were to compare like Deep Impact versus Armageddon or any of the other kind of pairs of movies that are similar thematically
Yep.
and come out the same
Yeah.
year, one of them is going to outperform the other because people will just say, oh, they just took the idea. But it's like, no, these movies took so long to make, and
Mhm.
Yeah.
they probably didn't know that the other one was being made, or maybe
Yeah.
they did. But
And they're
in this
two different
case, yeah,
movies, to be
the timing.
honest.
Oh yeah.
Oh
Couldn't
yeah.
be
Two
more
totally
different.
different
Yeah.
movies.
Yeah.
Just because
But I
there's
recall
ship
seeing-
and ocean.
Well, yeah.
Opposite sides of the world too.
Yeah.
Well, that's a
Yeah.
good
One,
point,
one,
right?
One's in the Pacific, one's in the Caribbean.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and also just the themes, who's the good guy, right? In that is the
Yeah.
privateers or is it the British? And so
Yeah.
there's immense differences between them, even in terms of just like, the feel. One of them is a fun, lighthearted one that leads to people doing impressions. And I guess in this case we did also do impressions, but no one's running around set like Russell Crowe or anything like that. After this
They
movie.
should, though.
And so yeah. Well, that's the thing. I mean, this viewing, and we'll get into it, but this viewing really sparked my interest in the movie anew, because I remember seeing both of them in theaters in 2003. And this one, I remember enjoying it, but I think there was so much lost on me in terms of the language, the dial, the all of the naval talk is very
Mhm.
hard to catch if you don't know what they're saying, and you maybe think it's more important than it is. And subtitles help a
Yeah.
lot, and also looking up terms you don't know helps a lot.
Yeah.
I don't know if you
I
guys
think
have
it's
to do
easier
that.
on
I'm
a
like,
second viewing as well, because I think the first time I
Mhm.
watched it too, I kind of thought, oh, this is kind of boring. Like, I don't really get it. But on
Yeah.
rewatches, I was like, oh, this is a great movie. Why didn't I like this at first?
Yeah, exactly. And so for those who aren't familiar with this film, then shame on you, first of all. Yeah, no, I'm just kidding. You check it out. You should watch it and then listen to the
Leave
rest.
now.
The
Yeah.
basic setting.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we
You
just
may
lost
go.
some listeners.
Good day, sir. I said good day.
You're dismissed.
Dismissed.
And so basically this is set during the Napoleonic Wars, and we have a brash British captain, Jack Aubrey. I'm not sure if I'd agree with brash. I'm also not sure what brash means. I may have borrowed this from IMDb.
At least you're
He's a
honest.
bold. He's
I think bold.
Look,
I think
let's be
bold is
honest.
a good one.
bold.
Yeah.
Is that what? Okay, he's a bold captain. He pushes his ship and his crew to their limits to reach the other side of the world, and he does this in pursuit of a formidable French war vessel around South America. And so this is a story with a lot of themes that we can get into, or maybe not. We'll discuss that. But overall, we're thankful that the Patreon supporters chose it, and I'm thankful that it finally won, because you start rooting for movies after a while.
Oh, yeah.
Because you don't. I don't vote because I'm not a Patreon supporter, and so instead I'm watching them and I'm like, oh, I hope it's not this, or I hope it is this. And so in this case, I'm really glad that that this one finally won, so that we can get some other stuff on the list, and also because it was a really good excuse to go out to watch it again.
Oh yeah, I was really happy to rewatch this. I did a quick little thing on my Facebook after I watched it. I just posted. I was like, if you haven't seen this, like, fix that deformity in your character. Just go and do it. It's like, but if you if you have seen it and it's been a while, go watch it again. It's a fantastic movie. Let's just say there's a reason why a lot of people are rediscovering it 20 years later. All right, so before we get into any spoilers, let's give this film some popcorn theology ratings. So just from the popcorn perspective, what did we think of the film? Was it stale, fresh, or buttered and salted? Basically, our typical bad, good, or great. So let's go ahead and start with our rankings and just a brief synopsis of why. So, Maddie?
I would say that it is buttered and salted for sure. It's it's a cat and mouse chase across the ocean during the Napoleonic Wars. I mean, what's not to like? And I just love this golden age of like historical fiction that was the late 90s, early 2000s, with like this one and The Last of the Mohicans, Braveheart, Gladiator. Like, they all kind of had a similar vibe going on. And I really like that. I kind of miss like really good historical fiction movies. I feel like they're not quite as popular anymore.
Very cool. So for me, it was that if you've ever done it where you have them fill up your popcorn halfway first, and then you put the butter on it, and then you take it back and fill it the rest of the way and do the butter. To me, it was layers of buttered and salted, layers of buttered and salted. You have to know the employees really well to be able to do that.
Nice.
But yeah, so the themes that are covered here are, I mean, they literally are timeless themes. The soundtrack is a banging soundtrack. I've listened to it probably 3 times. I watched it again on Monday. I've listened to the soundtrack probably 3 or 4 times since then. And it speaks to the deepest parts of, I'll say men, but really mankind. Men typically are drawn to this type of movie, but obviously Maddie is here as well. So I would say that the themes go with, they speak to the deepest parts of mankind.
Yeah. I was actually just talking with Eric before the podcast, and I was saying there's not a single woman actually, but I love it.
I mean, there's like the ladies on the boats for like half a second.
Yeah,
but yeah, you're right. Like,
half a second.
No one that says anything or has a name or anything like that. Yeah, it is a very
one woman with a name.
Male-dominated story. And so, yeah, that's something that I think would be a harder sell today, not just because of, discussions of, sexism or equality or anything, but partly just because I think that if it were made today, there would be more of a tendency to put a heavy emphasis on romance. And this movie resists that temptation. And I think partly
it's not
because
about
they were going to tee up a series based on this. And so perhaps we would have had more, he's writing a letter to his wife, I think, in the one of the early parts, and we don't get any info on that. That was probably meant to be an Easter egg for a future film, and I'm partly bummed that they didn't make more movies, but at the same time, I'm a little relieved because we never saw them go bad or set something up that they couldn't deliver on.
Yeah,
and so quitting while you're ahead, there's something to be said.
Yeah, we just talked about Pirates of the Caribbean. So could have stopped at 1 and probably should have. But
yeah, that's fair. But as far as the rankings go, sorry, I got off track there. But yeah, I would have said Fresh. I think if you had asked me, and I watched it like a year ago, just out of curiosity, it's like, oh yeah, that movie, I should watch that again. And I think after that viewing, I would have said Fresh. But upon this viewing, I was really paying attention to different things. And I thought, oh my goodness, they really just nailed the period piece, the tension, the pacing is great. Just from an acting perspective, no one outshines anyone else too much. And we've got 2 lead actors and they're holding toe to toe. And it's fantastic. It's visually dynamic. If you told me that this was made practically with real ships, I would believe you. I'm sure that most of it's special effects in terms of all the stuff happening at sea, but the sets are great. I don't know. It's just, and the other thing about it, we'll talk more later, is that they got excellent battle sequences without getting too graphic. They somehow walk the line between Chronicles of Narnia, kind of campy, and Saving Private Ryan, bloody, gory.
Yeah.
They walked that line really well. I was very impressed upon this viewing with that. So I would say definitely buttered and salted, no question, after this most recent viewing.
Yeah, definitely. So we all know a film's quality doesn't always reflect its depth of talking points. So if we're going to drink from this movie's depth of deep themes, what's in the cup? Is it diluted, carbonated, or my cup runneth over? So what do you guys think? Let's start with Eric.
All right, so my cup of grog runneth over. And one of the main themes that I'm going to be talking about as we go on is leadership. And the angle I'm taking more from it is not just the leadership things that you can pick out of this movie, and they're great leadership principles that you can do. I mean, go on YouTube and just watch some of the videos, masterclass, and just how to do leadership. But I'll be talking more about this topic of leadership that you get out of it is why it has endured so long and why so many men are being drawn to this film. Again, 20 years later, it's starting to find a resurgence. Even the Critical Drinker, for those that know the name, interviewed Russell Crowe probably about 2 months ago, and they talked for probably about, he only had like a 20-minute interview, and half of it they talked about this movie. So I would recommend and go and watch that that interview.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Yeah, sorry, a little breakup there. I lost some of what you said there, but I'm sure it was excellent as always. So
thank you, David.
In terms of
thank you, Lucky David.
Lucky David.
So as far as what's in this cup is full of a double ration of rum for these men. This was excellent in terms of themes. And again, I would have said carbonated. Last time I would have said maybe carbonated. It's okay, kind of in the middle in terms of average range of ideas, something to discuss. But really, when we started planning out the episode, for those who don't know, we don't just wing it all the time. We come up with notes and we plan out what we're going to talk about. And for this case, it was a matter of like, okay, who's choosing which one? Which direction are we going to go with it? Because there's a lot of directions we could go. The episode too long based on that, but it's definitely something that could lead to a lot more discussion than it probably will on this episode. And so that's something to continue in the Facebook group and all the places that we do that. But yeah, there's plenty to discuss. So I would say it's running over. What about you, Maddie?
I would definitely say my ship overflows with themes of submission, commission, and I'm going to talk a lot about being a member of a body with a higher purpose. Again, it all kind of ties into basically what you guys are saying. Everything is going to tie into that, like leadership and, again, submission to others. So, again, so many things that we could talk about in this movie. And again, like with you, David, I think the first couple of times I would have watched this, I would have thought like, yeah, it's got some good stuff. But yeah, on this last viewing, it's like, oh man, this is literally overflowing. Like I could pick out so many things to talk about in this movie, and it was not hard. Let's just say that.
Right. Yeah. We didn't have to dig, the way that we may have for Cocaine Bear a little bit. Although stuff jumped out at me from that particular one, but still, I would agree. I mean, and some other themes include, pride versus duty, right? Like, why do we do the things that we do? In terms of friendship, we see excellent examples of friendship, companionship, and in terms of that leadership element, how do you balance leadership and friendship? This movie touches on all of those things, illustrates so many great points. And it sounds like we all have quite a high ranking of it. This might be the first time, certainly the first time in a while, all threes, if you will, across the board in terms of in terms of rankings. And so, I think that we're all excited to delve a bit deeper to fathoms below. And so we're gonna drop some ads, raise the colors, and come back with a spoiler warning as we peel back the layers of Master and Commander. But before we do that, I want to quickly mention that we have merchandise. And so for those of you who are perhaps thinking about, garb and colors of your own, we've got beach towels, which are not exactly, they serve as bath towels as well. You got the one behind Eric in the video here. We've got coffee mugs, hoodies, hats. We got warm winter hats. Those are relatively new. So, various things like that. If you're looking for Christmas gifts for the movie lovers or theology nerds in your life, I just want to encourage you to consider, picking those up. We have a link in the show notes that can point you in the right direction. And roll the ads and the spoiler warning, and then we'll get back to Master and Commander: The Far Side of the World.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Popcorn Theology. If you want to hear more from us, subscribe on iTunes or your favorite podcast catcher.
Also, follow us on Facebook and Twitter and share this episode with your friends.
Assuming you have friends. To sponsor more content like this, consider supporting Popcorn Theology through Patreon. Then you'll make some friends.
For just $1 a month, you can have friends. You can become a patron saint and be added to our exclusive Facebook group where you can interact, influence, and vote on future episodes of the podcast.
Well, let's get back to the episode.
Thank you for holding fast with us through the ad break
Look
there.
at that.
Fantastic. That was worth it right there.
I should have done that. Why didn't I think of that? We should all done it.
Yeah, that is
The
great.
$200 tattoos was totally worth it for this.
Are you gonna get some brain surgery too, just so you can watch? Is that
Yeah.
his
Show us
brain?
Can you show us his
Those-
brains?
Those are his brains. That dude was
You opened my
one
head.
of my favorite
nothing in
characters in
there.
this. Yeah. Hey, mindless consumers. Take a look. There's his
Yeah,
brains.
yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
we could have
There's
done
nothing-
that. That would have been a good intro.
There's
Ah.
nothing in there.
Yes.
We had multiple ideas for the intro, and now we had another one to add to the pile. So,
Yeah, you know.
excellent. Well, again, thank you guys for joining us after the break. At this point, the spoiler flag will fly, and we're going to dig deeper as we drop anchor here for a while on Master and Commander.
All right, there it is. It's time for our popcorn thoughts. So, what did you guys think? Why, Eric, did you think it was buttered and salted?
All right, so I thought it was buttered and salted for obviously a lot of reasons that we'll talk in the theology section shortly. But just from the popcorn side of it, some of the standout moments are I lack a better word, the sermon at the end of where he's listing the names and then he does that little sermon. I have it in my notes. Then the soundtrack as a whole. The soundtrack is just incredible. Just the 3 bits of songs we've played so far, I'm like, man, I need to go listen to it again. Man, it just sticks with you. And then the final battle, just watching that again it's so intense it's fast and it's brutal, and it reminds you there's a general that said something, it is good that war is it's so terrible so we don't grow fond of it. Now unfortunately I think that general was actually wrong. I think we have grown fond of war, but I think that does get to the heart of this is they didn't shy away from they did it tastefully, but they didn't shy away from how brutal it is and how quickly things can turn. And then one other little piece of trivia is they just don't make films like this anymore. One of the pieces of trivia is they bought a real boat. They sailed it from somewhere in the US. I forget where. It may have been like Miami or something like that. Then they sailed it through the Panama Canal into the Pacific to do like some of the film into Mexico. That's where it was, to Mexico. And then they filmed all of the boat scenes that they needed there. As far as like a lot of the scenery shots, like when you see like, oh, the color of the water there or the color of water there. The interview that I was talking about earlier with Russell Crowe is all of those scenes. If they say, oh, we're in the Galapagos, that's actually the second unit went to the Galapagos and shot there. They're not just saying they're there. They actually went and got actual shots from there. Same with some of the other oceans. So basically it's like, if we say we're at X part, the director had the second crew go out and actually film in that area just so they actually had real scenery from that, which just shows that they don't make movies like this anymore. Part of me wonders if they even could, because of just that. I think they've lost an understanding of what makes a movie timeless and the care, love, and attention that goes into it.
Yeah. I think most movies don't have the budget to do that anymore either, because it's much cheaper to do CGI and green screen. So much more studios opt for that. because it is cheaper and you can pay more for other things. But it really does make a difference being able to. It's so tangible, and you can tell in a lot of these movies from that era, like I was talking about earlier, those other movies like Gladiator, Braveheart, and all those, same thing. Like you can tell they're actually filming in a real place, and it just feels gritty and like you're there. So
Yeah.
I love that.
Yep. So
But
Maddie, you thought it was buttered and salted
Mhm.
as well. So what were some of the things that you loved?
yeah, well, a lot of the same things that you said again, like, and I just love that it's a blending of like real people and battles. So Jack Aubrey is based on a real captain. I think it was oh, what was his name? Acheron or Cochran or something? No, I don't know. I can't remember it now. I had looked it up earlier, but he's based on a real person, and then the Acheron is actually based on a real ship, and then that final battle is based on a real battle. So they didn't, but yet none of the characters in there are real. None of them are names from history that you would recognize, but it takes place in a historical setting, and I love that, and I think it really worked well for this movie. And personally, I just love like all the lines in here, like the English quips and the impassioned
Oh yeah.
speeches. Like they're so great. There's lots of little, the lesser of two evils. I love that line. It's so funny. I love that scene. But yeah, their friendship.
A
is
man
just
that
really
will pun. A
fun
man
to
that
see.
will pun will pick a pocket.
Yes, yes, yes.
I need to use that line on my father-in-law because he keeps using puns, and
I know
I'm
so
not a
many
pun.
people,
I am
yeah.
not a pun guy.
No.
So I'm going to use that line next time. A
We
man
need
that
to
will
use that
pun
line
will
on-
pick a pocket.
We need to use that line on James on the podcast.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Next time we
Uh,
will. Oh my gosh.
yes.
No, but yeah, their friendship is just so great to see in this, and I feel like that's like one of the highlights of the film is Jack and Steven's friendship, and I also have to say that the acting performance by the kid who played Blakeney, Lord
Oh,
Blakeney,
gosh, yeah. Blakeney,
Max Purkis is his name, and he did such an excellent job in this.
Mhm.
And like he never really did anything else really big after this. But man, he blew it out of the water. He was great.
Out of the water. Yeah, I think
Fun.
that I was gonna say, where's my wallet? No, I think
I
that
reached into the
the,
screen.
yeah, I agree, and I wonder, man, that's one of the moments, especially with him, because you know they were teeing him up for so much, and I haven't read the books, but I really want to now. That speaking of which, have either of you read the books that they're based
No, and
on?
I would really like to as well. Maybe I'll have to go to
So
the
I found
library
out
and order it.
Check it out. Yeah, I found Spotify just has been bugging me lately about the fact that they do audiobooks, which I've always known they do some, but I guess they've stepped it up. And when I was looking for the soundtrack to listen to it on there, it was popping up with the books, and so I might listen to the books on Spotify. Maybe you should too. But I imagine that they were teeing him up to be a more long-term developed character, because that was the crazy thing, is that this movie, as was mentioned, they paid a lot of attention to the historical information that we have about this time and about these types of vessels and what life was like on them. I mean, even the fact, and it's so weird, but the opening shot of the movie, still I'm confused as to why they did it, because the second shot is, the day when they first spot the Acheron, but the first scene is just at night going through the ship with all of the people, they're asleep in their hammocks, and there's a changing of the watch, and like nothing seems to happen. It's just a quiet night, no events to speak of. But it shows a bit more of the level of detail. They've got the names on all of the cannons and everything. They just didn't hold back in terms of the historical accuracy. And so the fact that there were legit children fighting on these ships and serving their whole lives, from when they were Blakeney's age to when they were I don't know his name, but the holdfast guy, he probably spent his entire life at sea, or almost all of it. I mean, that's really telling. I mean, and the fact that you've got these battles, I will say, as much as I love this movie, it does have one of my most irrational fears in it, which is Civil War era amputation.
Oh yeah, that's a hard scene
It's one
to
of those
watch.
like, I don't think this will ever happen to me, but like, they
David's
hint
worst
at it in
nightmare.
Dances with Wolves.
Oh, yeah.
My worst nightmare is that I travel back in time to the Civil War and get shot in the leg.
I love how specific it is. Just like, I do not want this to happen to me.
No, I definitely don't. But I will say they did a really good job of showing things like the surgeries without it getting graphic. And as much as I want to point out, there's no way on earth he cut his arm off that quickly and that easily.
Oh no.
I've spent more energy cutting through a steak before. All right, you don't go through the bone that quickly, but that's okay. Regardless,
I don't even want to think about
it. Kept it PG-13. It kept it from being a gruesome, horrible act, which is what it actually would have been. As we mentioned before, this was a wild year for these types of movies because Pirates of the Caribbean came out, and man, we'll talk more in the theology section, I think, about this because the themes that are really exemplified by this movie are so in contrast to the themes exemplified in Pirates of the Caribbean, I think. I mean, honor is there somewhat in terms of pirates, but like when the final, kind of climactic line in the movie is, he's a pirate and a good man. You can tell it's like, this is the Disney take on piracy.
Yeah.
Piracy
Versus
is not good,
Master and
kids.
Commander. It's about duty, honor. Right. Yeah. Not recommended. Don't do piracy. But the other thing about this movie that I loved is the look that we get at 19th century naturalists, which is really what this is one of the reasons that this movie gets mentioned in my class virtually every year. And so for any of my students, I know the students at PHC are big fans of pirates, Master and Commander, maybe both, but at least Master and Commander. And so, when I talk about Charles Darwin and how he sailed from 1831 to 1836 aboard the HMS Beagle on a surveying mission around the world, around South America to the Galapagos. That's where he gathered the data and began to put the pieces together that he would assemble into the evolutionary theory. And as he did this, he was the equivalent of Stephen in this story, the gentleman companion of Captain Robert Fitzroy. And so they were of a similar class. They could dialogue and be, intellectual peers in a way that they couldn't with people of a lesser class, evidently. Although this movie doesn't portray it in such a negative light. Anyway, it's fantastic. And so I like to be able to illustrate that point. And this movie nails it because Paul Bettany was such a convincing Darwin to me that evidently he was cast in another movie to play Charles Darwin in 2009.
Oh, wow.
I'd never even heard of until I started
that.
looking into stuff for this episode. I know, because when I see it, I'm like, he looks just like him. He looks just like a young, much thinner Darwin. And it's just nuts. Also, I got to love Billy Boyd, right? I mean,
I know. Pippin right there.
Fantastic. So yeah, 2003 was a good year for Billy Boyd and the whole gang, if you will. So lots to love about this movie from the popcorn side for sure. And certainly there's even more to discuss, right? And so, yes, we're pouring the grog and we're shifting gears to sample some of the more spiritual aspects of the film and its narrative. And so as we do that, we're gonna hoist the mainsail and veer larboard here. I had to look up what larboard meant. Apparently it's the old-timey word for port. I didn't, because I'm like, it's port and starboard. Why are they saying larboard? Who's larboard? That's the old-timey word. They changed it in the 1850s to port because people were so confused by starboard and larboard. Anyway, so there's your factoid for the day. So yes, we got a double ration of themes. It seemed like everybody agreed on that. And so I'm going to need you both to get us going here. Maddie, could you set a course, south by southwest?
Aye, sir, south by southwest.
And Mr. George, beat to quarters, if you please. I think that's what they said, beat to quarters.
Yep.
I think something like that.
Yeah.
Bang the war drums. I don't know. So.
All right. So as we get into our theology here, Eric, what was that stood out to you in this viewing?
All right. So the main theme that really stood out to me is one of leadership. And the way I'm interpreting this title in this is leadership is what endures. And by that I mean is like, why has this movie lasted for 20 years? Is because of the things of leadership that this movie discusses. It has other reasons why too. You know, it has adventure, it has a purpose, it has a brotherhood, which is something that a lot of men are seeking nowadays. It has the incredible soundtrack, which I've talked about multiple times. And on top of it, it has the eternal hatred of the French that is built into all mankind. And
The French might have
as I've
issue with
said, well, I mean,
Yeah.
the French don't even like each other. Yeah. It's like, just ask a Quebecois what they feel about a Frenchman.
Our viewership in France just went way down.
Both of our French listeners have unsubscribed.
Left the chat.
Well, yeah, and that's the
Excellent.
timing of this was kind of ideal because if I remember around 05-ish, that it became really in vogue, if you will, to hate
Yep.
on the French. Again,
Yep.
you know,
Again.
1776
It was
through 2005, you know, things were okay. Obviously, there was stuff in
Yeah.
the middle, French Indian War,
Yeah.
all of that business. But you know, forgetting that stuff,
Yeah.
it helped us become a country. But like, you know, when are you going to stop? When are you going to stop harping on that?
yeah. What have you done for us recently? That's what I want to know.
Yeah.
But no, it's like this movie gives us it does give us an example of leadership that men are actually drawn to. So right now in the culture, there's a lot of conversations about, you know, this crisis of loneliness that's among men. I read 3 articles today about Master and Commander that basically all addressed why are men drawn to this movie so much, and part of it was this crisis of loneliness, that men look at this movie and they see they see purpose. they see that everyone has a job to do and everyone supports each other in that job. But then they are also, in our fatherless age that we're living in, they're also looking for a leader. And you find that in the captain, and a lot of the back and forth between the captain and Stephen kind of shows. I want to say, not the duality of man. I'm trying to think through the way exactly how to say it, but really it's like the two opposing forces of man's desire to be free and man's desire to have strong leaders. You know. And you know, I want to be free and want to do it my own, but I want you there to, you know, to help and support me and, you know, have my back when, you know, when I screw up. And that's what this film gives us, is in the captain a strong leader, a man who people can actually look up to. And he talks about what it actually is. In the one conversation he has with, I keep forgetting his name, the guy who jumps overboard. The conversations with him when he's Hullum, and he's describing what leadership is. And one of the things he says is, without respect, true discipline goes by the board. Because Hullum was saying, I'll yes, sir, I'll be a lot more tough on him for sure. And the captain's just like, it's not about toughness, man. It's not about just this toughness. It's you have to respect these people, and they have to respect you because you have your stuff together. And then in the conversation, and this really hit me when I was a young guy, I was actually more on Steven's side of the conversation. But now that I'm a little bit older and have experienced the world a lot more, I'm on the captain's side. So when the captain goes, men must be governed, and Steven's retort is, the excuse of every tyrant, from Nero to Bonaparte, at the time. And the conversation somewhat ends there. It goes to the whipping post after that. But really, there's biblical precedent for the captain's view. And from Proverbs 11:14 says, where there is no guidance, a people falls. But in an abundance of counselors, there is safety. And a lot of us have heard that second part a lot of times in our life, is, you know, in abundance of counselors, there is safety. or strength in numbers, that type of stuff. But we tend to ignore the parts of the Bible that actually like call us to account on a lot of stuff, and that is where God is saying is like you you need guidance. You men, yes, must be governed. They must be governed. But on top of that, and maybe it's not a but or a tangential, I'm not sure exactly how to transition, but there is a time that it is coming and partially is here, and we can see this in the church a lot, is in Hebrews 8:11. Hebrews 8:11, it says, "And they shall not teach each one his neighbor and each one his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest." And this is that time that is like, until we get to this point where I no longer have to tell David or Maddie, hey, you should go, go read your Bible because you're off base on this. And they do the same for me. It's like, at some point, because we have the Spirit indwelling in us, we won't need to do that with each other anymore, because we will all know the Lord in that regard. So that tension between men must be governed, and that's the excuse of every tyrant, is actually reconciled in Christ and in his finished work. And then we see it, or we're supposed to see it most close to home in the church, of how the church operates and how we work with each other. So moving on from that, I had a couple other little things here of why this film has lasted for 20 years. One, it's kind of funny to say that 18th century or 19th century, had to do the math real quick. 19th century England is the underdog, but this is a movie of an underdog. It is a smaller, slower ship that is hunting down a larger predator, and most of the time getting the raw end of the deal with it, and so I think this is one of the other reasons why. And then there's this admiration for your enemy that you don't really see that much anymore. Is after they got blindsided, and the only thing that saved them that day was getting into the fog. This is in Act 1. Is he wasn't angry, he wasn't mad or anything like that. He actually had admiration. He was like, he got me. Right, it was brilliant the way that he did that, the way that he swooped in and got it. It's like it was this admiration. And then even when he gets surprised again, and he goes, "That's 2 times it's happened. It won't happen a third." It was this. He was recognizing this. Like when they finally take the boat, the first thing he wants to do, he wants to see the captain. He wants to meet this guy, and then he picks up his book and he starts reading it. You notice, I'm not sure if you noticed that. They're literally the same person. I think they even had the same instrument and the same music and stuff like that. They were the same person, fighting on two different ships. One for the good guys, one for the bad guys. And then the last one, and this is the sermon that I was talking about. This leadership that he exemplified throughout this film, I think really culminated in really 2 speeches, and I'll get to the second speech in the lightning round. But the last speech, which is the sermon, at the end where they're burying the dead at sea, it says, "We therefore commit their bodies to the deep, to be turned into corruption, looking for the resurrection of the body when the sea shall give up her dead, and the life of the world to come. Through our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen." And it's one of the great things about, you can tell that this movie was made 20 years ago, and it was also made with love and care, because that sermon would have been cut out. It wouldn't have been there. They maybe would have had, the solemn music playing or something like that, and he would have been reading off the names, and the people would have been, the bodies would have been being dumped overboard. But it's like this sermon, and I think most of it honestly is a quotation from the Bible. This sermon here is really just exemplifies the reverence that a leader needs to have for his people, for him to actually be able to lead them well. And when the followers, for lack of better words, see that in the leader, it binds him to them even more than him just being lucky Jack. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you guys. Any additional thoughts that you had on that?
I mean, yeah, I completely agree as far as the timeliness of it. I mean, you mentioned that it's something that has been on the, the interest of men these days. I'm reminded of the whole, how often do you think of the Roman Empire thing? I don't. I genuinely don't. But
No.
If you ask me how often do I think about what it would be like to be on a ship at sea, that's more frequent, to be honest, partly because I got issues there, as I mentioned. But
That's the new question we're going to start asking.
well, exactly. I'm like, how often do you think of Her Majesty's Royal Navy or whatever, kind of, or I guess it's his.
It's his Majesty's now. Yeah.
At the moment. Yeah.
the
Oh, this was
moment.
Georgian era. There was probably a his then as well, but
It was his.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I think we're dealing with a time period that there is a resonance to it, and the elements of leadership. And I'm sure we'll circle back around to this a bit later, but there's a mutual respect element that he's not a cruel leader. There is something really powerful in that, and I agree. He's who knows his way with words, and not in a disingenuous way, not in a way that feels like he's being smarmy or manipulative. I mean, I'm reminded of, you mentioned the funeral. There's a different funeral scene where a fantastic back and forth as well that we'll probably talk a little bit about then. But basically, he ties everything back to God as creator. He ties everything back to being God's creatures. I think we may have had Our Father Who Art in Heaven in a movie made today, something like that. They have to, point to some of it, but I don't think that we would have had anything deeply theological the way that we actually get in this story. It's on the surface. I mean, really, it's not be dredged up from the deep, if you will.
No.
And so
No.
I'm very impressed with even, like you said, watching it 20 years after I first saw it in theaters. I'm a different man than I was then, and so watching this movie, I'm sitting there thinking like, oh my gosh, I need to take notes. I need to take notes on leadership. If you see how the men treat Jack and how the men treat Aubrey, and how Aubrey treats the men, he doesn't treat them as like, he's not trying to be their buddy. He has nothing to prove to them. He has complete authority. I'm reminded of the centurion, right? When Jesus is about to heal his servant, he says, listen, I know how this works. I'm a man under authority. I say come and they come. I say go and they go. You could picture Russell Crowe saying those words. I really could, because he understands that, not just because he was in Gladiator.
I was about to say he was a Roman general. Yeah.
He was. He's been many things.
But because when he
Commander
says
of the Northern Armies. Yeah.
For more, check out
the
episode 2 whatever it is. So no, I agree that there's so much to the leadership notes that really is a master class, again, no pun intended, in what leadership looks like. And so I was quite blown away by that, for sure.
Yeah. I was kind of
Maddie, what?
Yeah, I was kind of picking up on that. You were saying like men looking for that kind of bond and how everyone has like a role and a purpose. And I was thinking about 2 Timothy 2:4, and it says, "No soldier in active service entangles himself in the affairs of everyday life, so that he may please the one who enlisted him as a soldier." Basically, again, that you need that governance, you need authority in your life, you need a father figure in a sense in your life, because I was thinking about that as well. And like I was thinking like you don't, as a father, you don't want to be like friends with your kids necessarily. Like of course you can be friendly with them and do fun things with them, but ultimately you are in a role of authority. And I have seen people whose parents are like their best friends, and guess what, they never listen to their parents. They again, because that's their best friend, they wouldn't punish me or anything. and you kind of lose that structure. And I think people tend to see structure as a bad thing, but structure is very good for us. God gives us structure. He gives us the Ten
Mhm.
Commandments. He gives us these rules in order to help us, not to like bind us and hinder us. It's like I give these to help you. And it's the same thing like if you join the military or anything like that, or the Navy. It's these rules are there for a
Mhm.
reason. You have to have this structure of authority and this hierarchy in a sense. Otherwise, the whole thing crumbles.
Yeah. But
Right.
as Captain Jack says to Stephen, there's like, you tell me all the time there's hierarchy even in nature. And yeah, and it's like you're right, Maddie, that we all are under authority, and we all will be in authority at some point as well. And you never
Yeah.
want to you never want to get out of bounds with that. So Maddie, turning over to you, you're actually what you were just talking about transitions very smoothly into. It's almost like you planned that. It was really, really.
We just
So
all
Maddie,
have the same wavelength.
I know that David said it wasn't a hard movie. I was like, what are you talking about? This was a really hard movie to pick one thing to focus on.
I mean, true.
Yeah.
It
So
was true.
Maddie,
No,
what themes you got for us tonight?
so kind of bouncing off your leadership, again, it kind of starts with the head. We talked about leadership, and now we're going to talk about the body. So Christ is the head, but now we got the body, and that's the crew. So, and how we have unity and disunity in the body. So on the crew of the HMS Surprise, there's 197 souls. And it's a perfect example of the church acting as the body of Christ out in this ocean. Within the first few minutes, we know their purpose, their commission that they're supposed to do, and we're introduced to different ranks of men, and each rank has its own purpose and duties. But they all have one thing in common, and that's they all serve the king and his commands. That is the tie that binds. And the line that they keep saying throughout the movie is subject to the requirements of the service. Because everything is subject to the king. Everything has to go back to this is our mission, this is our purpose, and we have to do this. And in 1 Corinthians 12, 14 through 20, we see talking about the body of Christ here. So, for the body does not consist of one member, but of many. Because I am not a hand, I do not belong to the body. That would not make it any less a part of the body. And if the ear should say, because I'm not an eye, I do not belong to the body, that would not make it any less part of the body. But as it is, God arranged the members in the body, each one of them as he chose. As it is, there are many parts, yet one body. And this crew embodies that. No pun intended. Because we see them, I like that scene where they run the drills together, and he just has them run drills until they're sufficient and fast and working together as one. And yet they also all have separate jobs. So you have cooks, carpenters, lower deckmen, midshipmen, a doctor. And I noticed even in the one scene, they even have carpenters and artisans to fix the figurehead after the figurehead is kind of blown up after that attack. So they each have a pretty singular purpose, and yet all part of one commission and mission. But if orders are not followed, then there are consequences. And in Deuteronomy 13:4, it says, you shall walk after the Lord your God and fear him, as keep his commandments and obey his voice. You shall serve him and hold fast to him. And I had to get that in there with the hold fast line. Because you have to hold fast to the commandments. Yes, hold fast. You have to hold fast to the commandments of the king. Otherwise, there is disunity. And like I said earlier about leadership, all that structure, it breaks down, and you're forsaking God's purpose and your duty to the king. Like in this movie, you would be forsaking your duty to your king if you went off course and did what you wanted to do. And in James 4:1, it says, what causes quarrels and causes fights among you? It is not this, that your passions are at war within you. You desire and do not have, so you murder. You covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. And this is kind of one of the main conflicts we see in the movie, is that they kind of start to fight and quarrel between some of the higher ranks and the lower ranks, starting with the midshipman Hallam, who is the guy who ends up
Mm.
committing suicide. And his problem is that he has no confidence in himself. He lacks this purpose and has no desire to distinguish himself into the office that he has been given. He's too fearful to really take it up. So he ends up killing himself because he feels purposeless and hopeless, and he never embraced the role that he was meant to embrace. Unlike the kid we were talking about earlier, Purkis, I think was his last name, but Midshipman Blakeney in this movie. He's like the total opposite of Hallam, and I love the contrast that they show between them. Even though he's like 12 years old, and again, like this is all historically accurate. They had kids on these ships during that time learning this trade. It was going to be their job. And unlike Hallam, he has the courage and the fortitude and the confidence to stay with his purpose, and he finds a way to serve and serve even through difficulty and loss of limb in David's Nightmare. And I love in that final battle, he's so confident in himself. This kid, he's leading his own gun crew. And it's like, hey, look, they're there. We need to point the cannon there, and we need to, attack them. Unlike Hallam, who in the first scene of the movie, he can't make a decision about whether or not they need to beat to quarters. And they should have, because it ends up that was a ship that they saw. That was the Acheron. And then I think the most interesting character in this movie is the doctor, Stephen, because he also doesn't really embrace his purpose at first. Unlike Hallam and Blakeney, they don't really have arcs, but he has an arc to where he starts selfish and pursuing his own purposes and not wanting to be a part of the body, not really, kind of against tyrants, and basically insinuating that his king might be a tyrant. And that he's more of a naturalist, and I love the line where Blakeney goes to him and he's like, well, maybe we could combine them, like a fighting naturalist. And he says, I find they don't combine too well. And so he's very kind of dismissive of authority and prideful, but it's so awesome to see that he learns that he has to submit his will to a greater purpose than his own. And he at first gets angry when he can't have his own desires, but then realizes that the ship is in service of the king, all requirements, submit to that. And he ends up sacrificing his own desires. So when he finally gets to the Galapagos and he finally gets to go exploring and he collects all his specimen, and then he sees the Acheron, and he knows, he's like, I've got to go back and warn them. Like, I don't have a choice here. Like, I can't let my love of doing this interfere with our main purpose, with their great mission. So we as Christians, we just have to be subject to the requirements of the service so that we all can fulfill our mission. About this movie that really stood out to me this time. So you guys, any thoughts on those?
Man, excellent points for sure. What do you think, Eric?
Yeah, no, I agree. There's one line you had here, and I am sorry if I can't see exactly what it was, but so there's in military there's something called commander's intent, and basically what it is, if you teach to the commander's intent, it actually empowers your people to be able to like make decisions on their own. So it's like Hallam, he knew the commander's intent. The commander's intent was you're the officer on deck, you're the officer of the watch. So when you see the ship, these are your my intention as your captain is that you would do X, Y, and Z. And so if you know those if you know the commander's intents, then you can just lead from there. And so I love this idea is that if we are Christians and we are You had it there. You didn't quote it, Maddie. I'm sorry, but you have it right there.
Oh yeah, I did.
I know.
Not
skipped
my
that.
will, but yours. Not my will, but yours. If you're living that as a Christian and you're understanding your commander's intent, then your life is going to be better. But secondly, you will actually not be purposeless anymore. It'll actually help cure some of that longing. Why you come and watch this movie to fill a little bit of that gap inside of you of like, oh, it makes you long for this brotherhood, and it makes you long for a purpose. It makes you long for leadership. Well, we have that in Christ. And if we know his commander's intent, we can go and we can live in that and have the type of desires that are attracting men to this type of movie. So great points, Maddie.
Yeah. See, I
Yeah,
left it just
absolutely.
for
I
you
was-
because
I
you
was
just
wait-
made a great point out of it.
That's why I was looking at that line too, and I was like, oh, I hope somebody says it. That was very good.
Yeah, I don't even know how I missed
so-
that. I was right there, and then I guess I don't know. It's hard to scroll on this when
And
I'm
you
like
wrote
double
it,
screen
yeah.
here. I've got like you guys on the side and my notes on the other side.
I know what you mean. Yeah, the struggle is real. No, I totally get that. Yeah, I think so. As far as this, you guys have been making fantastic points, and I think that so much of it comes down to just the superb writing in this film,
Absolutely.
and that we see in this. So this whole idea, Hallam, I mean, such a tragic
Mhm.
story, because
Mhm.
he's a man who seems to be a man of character, a man of virtue, but he is also just terrified. He basically has a panic attack, that and he's worried that he's cursed, that he's a Jonah. We had to at least spend some time. Anytime that a Bible character is referenced in an open Bible is placed in a movie, that warrants at least some discussion. But this idea of him being a Jonah, they really seem to take it seriously, and the resolve he has on his face when they said, "Oh, Captain thinks we'll get our win tomorrow," and he says, "I'm sure of it." You're like, "Oh my
Mhm.
gosh, oh, he's about to do it!" Like, and
Yeah.
I'm sure I missed that the first few times, and they're all so convinced. Even the captain seems convinced that he
Yeah.
was a Jonah.
A little
this
bit,
kind of
yeah.
needed to happen, which is awful. But what he says at the funeral, where the rest of the crew is like, "Yeah, he had it coming." The captain says, "The simple truth is, not all of us become the men we once hoped we would be, but we are all God's creatures.
Mhm.
If there are those among us who thought ill of Mr. Hallam, or spoke ill of him, or failed him in respect of fellowship, then we ask for your forgiveness, Lord, and for his." I'm like, oh my gosh,
That was
that's
so good.
incredible.
Yeah.
That is not only beautiful wording, succinct, states everything that needs to be said. And yeah, that really summarizes the point, which is that we are all God's creatures, despite the fact that some of us don't make it to where we think that we should be. That we can't all be. You're not David, right?
Yeah.
We're not all going to be the people that we don't all get to be the Russell Crowe of our story.
Yeah.
Perhaps I'm the Hallam of my story. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like I'd settle for Blakeney, for goodness sake. But no, I mean,
Yeah,
it could be
but
that right now that's where I am in my own story, and that's heavy. But what we see with this is an excellent exploration of what that looks like, and who we are called to be. And I'm reminded as well to take a bit of a jump back, to tie it into the Marvel universe ever so slightly. Loki said it well. It is in your nature. You crave subjugation. That in the
That's
end you
true.
will always kneel. There is something about us that craves a leader like that. I mean, and I've seen in this, even less direct. I mean, I've seen a meme about the Tom Holland Spider-Man where they're like, in the first, Spider-Man Homecoming, he goes from being like a 16-year-old who says, you can't tell me what to do, to in the next movie, to being a 17-year-old that says, please, someone just tell me what to do. And if that's not the most relatable thing ever, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what it's like to become an adult, because you think that you know everything, and then suddenly the world crashes in on you, and you just want somebody to give you that guidance. I'm reminded as well.
To think my parents
as
were
much
right.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And don't let them know, it'll go to their head. But
I was about to say, I'm not quite there yet.
Not
I
yet,
love my
okay.
parents, but Yeah, they have some growing up to do. They listen in
My dad-
occasionally, so.
I was going to say, my sometimes
trouble
listens
now.
too, so I'm nervous that he's going to get the wrong idea from this.
You're like, what do you think?
But no,
Sorry
I
to all
think
the
that
parents.
right, yeah. But what stands out is that this notion that while we so often crave to be this independence, this freedom, this freedom, we're Americans after all. We're not even like the British. We're
Yeah.
even freer than they were.
Rugged individualism.
Right, exactly. That rugged
we
individualism.
we
is-
built the French's boat after all, so we didn't even care.
Right, exactly. But as much as that's the case, we're not built for a democracy. We're not built for a nation. We're not built for whether of any political persuasion. I'm reminded of the words of Derek Webb in his one song called "A King in a Kingdom." He says, "My first allegiance is not to a flag, a country, or a man. My first allegiance is not to democracy or blood. It's to a king and a kingdom." In the end, that's who we are all going to be serving, whether we like it or not, whether we want to be ruggedly individualistic or not. Eventually, we will all bow a knee to the King who created us, and so that is something we should keep in mind as we, seek to, to serve Him well on earth. But anyway, sorry, try not to go off on a tangent with that. It's
No, that's a good tangent.
It's powerful though. But I'll just jump in here because this segues well into my theme here, which is that of leadership as well, but also of pride and of duty. And so while we see that Jack's leadership in this story is superb, we also see that there are questions that are raised about his motivations concerning duty and pride. And basically, to what degree is Jack's motivation duty to his country? And to what degree is it prideful because he was beaten and he doesn't want to lose? To be defeated. You're not accustomed to defeat, I think is what Stephen tells him at one point. Stephen, the doctor, he pushes back on Jack's decisions. They have a fantastic relationship, iron sharpening iron there. But we also see that he's similarly motivated by his own interests, perhaps by even pride over his naturalist aspirations. In case you're curious, the timing of this, they go to the Galapagos. He basically plays Darwin in this, in what would have been 1812 or something like that. 1810 is when this is set, I believe.
I think 1805. It was
I think
early.
1805 is what
Yeah,
it said
yeah.
in the beginning titles is the year.
Yeah, so very, very early. Darwin didn't go to the Galapagos till 1830 something, somewhere between 31 and 36 on his voyage. And so he would have had an enormous head start on Darwin. Again, this fictional character, but there were probably other people in similar situations. And so he had his own perhaps prideful aspirations. But in this friendship, we also see a great example of servant leadership and mutual submission, which is really what we should pursue in the body of Christ. And so in Matthew 20, this is just what kept coming to my mind. The degree of respect that we see that the captain has for his crew, even when he's telling them, no, we're not doing the thing you're saying, he's not cruel about it. He is, your respect, I appreciate your opinion. Your understanding on this is beyond all doubt, but such and such simply won't do. Or he says that, even when someone raises objections, he says, "Thank you, sir. It will be noted in the log," in a very respectful way. It's just incredible because he's bold, he's firm, but he's still kind. And how do you strike that balance? Matthew 20, verses 25 through 27. Jesus is speaking to the disciples who had just been arguing about who was the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Jesus called them to him and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. It shall not be so among you. For whoever would be great among you, and whoever would be first among you, must be your slave, even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." And so this whole idea of leadership, we see exemplified in Jesus. He washes the disciples' feet. He washes Judas's feet. Like, I can't get over that. How does he wash Judas's feet, knowing what's about to happen? But in this case, we see that the captain, and I'm going to go ahead and credit Miles on this. He gave some excellent notes in our group chat.
Yes, he did.
That we see mutual sacrifice here. That Captain Jack, which I keep thinking of the wrong one when I say that, Jack Aubrey.
Captain Jack Sparrow.
He sacrifices.
Absolutely, yes. He sacrifices his prize conquest of the Acheron to save the Doctor. Right? He says, he's willing to lay down the life of a crewman if he has to, only if he has to. The man who falls off with the portion of the mast, I think it was,
Oh yeah.
into the water. I mean, he didn't take that lightly, but he knew that this could kill all of us, and so he had to cut him loose. But for the Doctor, he says, we're gonna prioritize this, and he gives up the Acheron, and then we see that he gets to return the favor, where Stephen, who could have become basically Darwin, he could have become Charles Darwin, gives all of that up in order to get back to the ship because of his duty. And I love especially that he could have kept it to himself. He's the only one who knows it's there. He didn't even have to tell Blakeney or the big guy who was carrying the stuff. He could have kept it all quiet, but he didn't. He had that sense of loyalty. And then we also see that there's this insight where he finds the walking stick, what did they call it? A phasm? I don't know. It was an old time word, but basically a crypt. Yeah. And so it was moving. It was disguising itself, and that's what gives him the idea. And so they're benefiting one another. And then eventually we see that with Stephen eventually being a fighting naturalist actually seems to agree with him when he takes up arms.
Yeah.
Let's go.
They're not mutually exclusive.
Right, let's go. That's right. Yeah. It's like, let's go Jarvis, which, by the way, as a quick aside, this movie has both Jarvises in it. Did you guys catch that?
No, I didn't. Yeah.
And so it's got the Jarvis the Elder, if you will, Paul Bettany, and then Matt Darcy, who was I want to say first mate. That's probably not the right term, but
I know
his
who you're
right hand
talking
man,
about.
the guy with the scar on his face. He plays Jarvis in the Agent Carter series. So I just thought that was kind of
okay.
He plays the guy who inspires Jarvis. Anyway, Jarvis the Younger, if you will. But both men are submitting to each other. I think that was
James D'Arcy, first lieutenant. That's who it was. Yep.
Yeah. Well, that's the actor's name, I think. Or is that the character's name?
No, James D'Arcy is the actor's name, and then he's first lieutenant Thomas.
Gotcha. Nice. And so when it comes to the examples that we see here of mutual submission, I mean, this is something that I think is even applicable in marriage, right? That men are called to lead and love their wives. Women are called to submit to their husbands, but there's a mutual sense of that, because the way men are called to love their wives is sacrificially, the way Jesus loved the church and died for it. And so that's not something that we can take lightly, that, love her, treat her nice, but ultimately she better submit to you. It's like, no, you need to be dying for her. And if you're dying for her, then that earns respect and submission. And so anyway, Ephesians 5:21 speaks to this idea of submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ within the church as a whole. That's what it's primarily referring to here. And then in Philippians 2:3-4, we see this incredibly important verse: do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others. And so, I think that this really ties in a lot of the themes that we've explored so far, which is leadership. We also see the importance of love for one another and the body of Christ, and not treating others as better or worse based on their role. Jack certainly seemed to respect it. Sir, everyone was Mr. Maybe some of that's kind of, British niceties, but it didn't seem disingenuous at any point. So that was very compelling, I think, in this story. I don't know. What did you guys think? Any concluding thoughts before we enter the lightning round?
Yeah, no, I definitely, like your points that you've made there. It's something that I've talked about before with my wife and then other friends about the whole thing of love and respect, of men, love your wives, respect your husbands. And it's interesting how a lot of times we pick up on love. I mean, I'm sure you've heard it before. Love is a verb. People say love is a verb, and it's a command. But yet a lot of times we don't look at it the other way as far as respect. That's where we go, you have to earn respect or something like that. Was actually Bible. It's like, if we want to use that thing, then that means you have to earn my love,
Hmm.
which would sound very much like an abusive marriage and relationship. And so if we want to, let's try to think about this a little bit when we go, oh, love and respect, and well, if you sacrifice enough for her, then she'll automatically respect you. As well, she's commanded to respect you. It's the way you're commanded to love and sacrifice for her. So I definitely agree with that. And to the movie, with is one thing I caught, and it came and went really fast, and I didn't have subtitles on, so I didn't get the exact quote. But basically, it's like this thing of duty versus pride. And so his duty actually only is like his orders were only to go as far as, I think it wasn't like
I believe.
Brazil. Yeah, it was like
It was
his
like
orders were to
such
go.
and such part of Brazil.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was like,
Yeah.
he was way outside of his orders. And yet,
Yeah.
and it was kind of an interesting thing. Is like, and that was more of an admission to Stephen, is because he basically had to admit to him, is like, yeah, I know I've been saying, what's the quote, Maddie, that subject to the requirements of the service.
Yeah.
I know I've been saying that, but really I'm actually beyond my orders
Yeah.
right now. And so he was maybe even operating outside of that commander's intent that I was talking about earlier. So yeah, it is one of those things where we can wrap up our pride, or we can disguise our pride as duty. Oh, I'm just doing this for you. It's like, it could be a husband working 15-hour shifts and beyond, and oh, it's my duty to do this. Is like, well, are you working 15-hour shifts because you're avoiding something at home, or because you're an inefficient employee and you need to become better? Or it's like, why do you have to work 15-hour shifts, and then wrapping up your pride of versus your duty to provide for your family, is that now bleeding into pride, and why you're working so hard, not working so hard, working beyond the requirements of the duty. You guys know what I'm saying. It's late on my coast. It's almost midnight on my
I
side.
know, we're keeping you up real late.
No,
Yeah,
it's
a
all
lot of
right.
good stuff,
I
though.
just start to
McSmells
ramble.
over there. No,
it's good, though.
I totally see what you mean, which is that workaholic approach. I mean, and it's incredibly relatable.
Workaholic. That's what I was trying to say. Yeah.
No, you're right. I mean, but I think you make a fantastic point, which is that to what you can always take the Walter White approach, which is right. Like, anything I'm doing is defensible because I'm doing it for my family. But are you really?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
are you doing it out of your own pride? And that's incredibly important distinction to make, for sure.
Yeah. I kept thinking about what you were saying about like respect between Stephen and Jack Aubrey, and how we said masterclass in leadership, and I think it's also a masterclass in how to disagree with people respectfully. Because they have so many scenes where Stephen will just outright just disagree with the captain, and again, instead of like getting at him, except in the one scene, they deal with it in a really good way. And I feel like most people nowadays don't know how to do that. I like watching those like man on the street interviews where somebody will go out and be like, oh, why do you think there's more than two genders, and hold the microphone out. And people will just be so offended that they'll just even walk away without even saying anything. Like, they won't even try to engage in conversation with them because they're so offended by them. And I feel like people have lost that sense of like, you can be friends with people that you disagree with. It's happened to me most of my life. I went to a very secular university. I was probably one of the very few Christians there. And I don't know. I never got really angry with people. I disagreed with them, obviously. And again, like at certain points, you do have to be firm, like in the one scene where he's arguing, Stephen's arguing, the doctor is saying, you promise, I view a promise as binding. Like you promised me this and I need to go do this. And, he says, your hobbies be damned, sir. And, and it's like, I'm sorry, but like, that we have a greater purpose to fulfill. And yet they can still continue being friends after that. You know, like they pick it back up, they still play their instruments together, and
Mhm.
I just find that really, again, it's a beautiful friendship, and it's one of the highlights of the movie. I feel like about how you respect somebody in a friendship, even when you have moments of disagreement.
Mm, absolutely. Agreed. And it makes me want more of these stories. It makes me want,
Hmm.
obviously, to read the books, but additionally to just, I kind of wish that they would have kept going. You know, I'm so torn whether it was a regretful thing or just it was good that it was a single standalone uh, ship in a bottle, if you will, in terms of its quality. Uh,
Yeah, I think
and
it was
so
lightning in a
as
bottle
we
too.
wrap, exactly right. And speaking of which, we are.
Oh, I didn't even plan that.
Yes. Oh, you didn't? Oh, yeah, that was perfect.
No.
And so we have, we're going to be before the storm takes us into shore. We're going to spend a little time on our lightning round, which is where we kind of briefly mention things to hopefully spawn further discussion on topics that are falling into the category of receive, reject, and redeem, concepts that we can thoughtfully reject and that we can say this is probably not going to be something that comports with the Christian worldview, versus things that we can receive either directly or that we can, modify a bit and say it's close to what Scripture teaches. And so, what did you guys think, Eric? Did you have any reject ideas from this movie?
Yeah, so I'll start off with this, and I'll predicate it with I'm not a pure materialist or naturalist. I believe in the metaphysics. So, um, I do say this with that, but yes, one thing to reject is the seaman's superstition. Is they and really at the end of the day, one of the things that breeds superstition, in my estimation, is the need to blame someone and a non-reliance upon God's sovereignty. They focused in on Mr. Holm and viewed him as Jonah because they needed someone to blame. They believed God was, there was someone on this ship that was cursed, and God wasn't going to bless them until they had done it. And my thing is, unless the person directly tells you that they were running from God and that person had a message directly from God, it's like Jonah's not your application. So you said you're not David. I'll go ahead and put this out here. Is like, you're not Jonah. You're not. You're not Jonah. Go ahead. Is like, as Christians, we are called to build up the body, not cast members of the body out. If they're an unbeliever, if they're unrepentant, yes, there's church discipline. There's things like that. But to ostracize someone away, and I won't do the whole quote from the sermon that David read earlier at Mr. Holmes' funeral, and this is the line that hits me, is, or failed him in respect of fellowship.
Yeah.
Failed him in respect of fellowship. That is what, when you focus on superstition, when you focus on not relying on God's sovereignty and focus on not building up the body and instead trying to find the person who's 99% like you, which means they're 1% off, which means they need to be cut out. When you're focus on that, showing someone respect in fellowship and offering that hand of fellowship to them.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Yeah, I agree with the superstition. It's definitely rough because they're justifying it. They're finding reasons. Oh, every time he's on watch, something bad happens. No, it's not. Not every time he's on watch. How often? I don't know how often someone's on watch, but I'm guessing it's every day or every few days. You named 3 or 4 things that happen. I mean, yeah, you're right. We find things to blame. We find reasons to blame others when really, like you said, we need to rely on God's sovereignty. That's so key. And so one thing we were talking about earlier is I believe Maddie has a reject point related to the music in this movie. Um,
I do.
which
And it's not
is
because the music's
something to do
bad,
with
because it's not. It's very good. Like Eric said, like this soundtrack is amazing, but like I must say I reject the way Russell Crowe plays violin. it's it's like one of the
it
few
sounded pretty good to
things
me, but
that yeah, well, it's not him playing. It's one of the few things that takes me out of the film because of the way he's like moving his bow is so unrealistic. And I'm like, no, he's not actually playing that violin. It's kind of like sometimes when they show people playing piano in movies and they just show their hands.
Mhm.
When they're just showing their hands, the actor is not playing.
yeah.
It's a little harder to do that with violin. So, he's just kind of moving his bow kind of slack there. It irks me a little bit. So, that's my reject. That's the only thing I could find to reject, which that's a
Is-
good thing.
Agreed. There's not much. I am curious, as a quick aside, when you watch, have you seen Fiddler on the Roof?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so the silhouette, the fiddler,
Mhm.
it's very dramatic. It's very not over the top, but it's very exaggerated.
Yeah.
Is that
That
would that be
that one
core
doesn't
form?
bother me. That seems realistic to me for the music that he's playing. I think the
Huh.
thing in this movie is like I can hear the notes that the violinist is obviously playing, but it doesn't look like the bow is actually hitting
Ah.
those.
Fair
Um,
enough.
and it's like when in those trills and stuff, he didn't have like a long enough bow stroke for all of that. You're just like, there's no way
Mm.
he could fit all that in there. So again, it's just something you would notice if you actually played
Yeah.
that instrument, I think. And again, I think he was trained to actually start playing it, but again, like you can't learn it in just a few
Yeah.
weeks, or 3 months.
Pick
It
up
takes a while.
violin. Yeah, exactly.
And violin is one of the
There's a
harder
lot of
ones too.
instruments. Right. Yeah. I mean, if you're going to pick up, like the guys in That Thing You Do, they learned how to play their instruments for that movie.
Yeah.
But those are fairly simple instruments and fairly simple
Yeah.
songs. That's a little different.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
no, I agree. As a quick aside, I'm one of the few to quickly defend Russell Crowe in terms of Les Miserables, because people
Oh,
are
I
like,
love
he
him in
can't
Les
sing.
Mis.
He's a terrible singer. I
No.
thought he was fine. I thought he was okay.
I thought he was
The
great.
thing is, he actually
Yeah.
was a professional musician. People don't know this. He was actually a professional folk musician for a long time
Yeah.
before becoming an actor and during as well. And so, no, he's not a classically trained singer. Neither is Johnny Depp from, in doing Sweeney Todd. But they both did about the same level of pretty good.
Yeah.
Anyway, no, not everyone can be Hugh Jackman. Okay, like under male expectations here. We need to bring those down.
No, wait.
So, what about receive or redeem? What are some ideas from this that we can either receive outright or that we can kind of tweak and say, yeah, this fits neatly with the Christian worldview?
So one that I would go with as far as receiving is living up to your duty, even when it means disappointing a friend. And one of the lines that stuck out to me was the captain said, "I command the king's ship." And it's a very matter of fact type of thing. It's like, yes, I know I made a promise to you, or I know we were planning on doing X, Y, and Z, but I command at the king's pleasure. And if really from a Christian application, it's one of those things where people have said there's it's a stupid saying and atheists say it, but it's like there's no love like Christian hate or something like that, or there's no hate like Christian love. I think is what it is.
Oh,
Basically,
yeah.
what they're insinuating is that our love is not actually love. Well, we have a different definition of love. It's like our definition of love comes from our transcendent God, who's the perfect moral being, perfect moral lawgiver, however you want to phrase it exactly. And that's where our morality comes from. And so I would say that's a redeem part of that exact same thing would probably be, don't make promises you can't keep.
Yeah.
One of the best lines in any Disney movie ever is from Beauty and the Beast, where Clocksworth is talking and listing off things that you can do things for. You can chocolates and this promises you have no intention of keeping. Yeah. As Christians, we don't live that way, and so that'd be the redeem aspect of that. Is the receive is, yes, your duty is I serve as a Christian, at the king's leisure. I command the king's ship. Well, on the redeemed side of it is don't make promises you can't keep. In the book of James, it says, let your yes be yes and your no be no, and just leave it at that.
Yeah,
Yep,
for sure.
Yeah, I think we can definitely receive. I love that quote near the end before that final batter. And though we be on the far side of the world, this ship is our home. This ship is England. And it just makes me think of what if we treated our work for the Lord as this man does for his king that he serves.
Yeah.
Treating
Yeah.
the church as our home, because we are aliens here in this world. This isn't our home, but when we are with the body of Christ, we are home. The church is our home, and we have a duty, and we need to do our duty to our king in his service. And I just think this is a beautiful picture of like what that could look like.
Oh, fantastic. That's the thing. There almost doesn't seem like a ton that needs to be redeemed, because so much of it seems like it can be received either outright or when
Yeah.
applied to the proper situation,
Mhm.
received outright. So the one author out there is, I'm pulling all of these things in my mind from these examples of leadership that are very practical to my current situation. But obviously that's my situation. That's not everyone else's. But one thing that we can all relate to is a tendency to fall victim to the fear of man. If you look, Hallam was such a compelling character for me in this movie, because if you look in his eyes, the way he looks around in that opening scene, he's not sure. He's looking at all. If I call them, if I say beat to quarters and they all get up for nothing, then they're going to hold it against me. Oh no. And he's so worried about what they're going to think of him. And Captain even assures him, well, you did the right thing. Even if you weren't sure, you did the right thing. And it's true. He did, because it happened to be the case. But even if it wasn't, over caution is good. I guess what it reminds me of is this idea of the fear of man is very tempting, because especially in, you can apply it to many social situations that are happening today, many situations facing the church. There's a major pressure for us to fold on issues and to look around and see what everyone else thinks, and to cave to those rather than standing on conviction. And I think that it's very important that we can do what Captain Jack encourages Hallam to do, which is to find that courage that is within yourself, knowing your role and your calling as image bearers of Christ, and to show proper conviction and love for those that you are called to be around, and in some cases to have authority over, or at least to be just neighbors of. And so I'm very struck by that in this story, because we really see the outcome of someone who has balanced care for his neighbor with conviction and with duty. I mean, with maybe a little pride mixed in there that he works through, versus Hallam, who is crippled, literally crippled until it ends his life by his concern for what everyone thinks of him, to the point where he thinks he's doing everyone a favor by offing himself. And so it's very sad, kind of cautionary tale that we could probably apply and perhaps over apply to some situations that are happening today. Anyway, as we wrap up, I think that certainly we've gone long. This has been a I look forward to seeing what the discussion continues with. But before we go, we can just kind of quickly want to point you to some things as we are about to pull into port, if you will.
Yes. Well, before we get there, before we pull in the port, we want to encourage you to like and share this episode with your friends. That is, if you like what you hear. We don't want any negative stuff, but you can leave as long as you leave a 5-star review. You can say actually whatever you want in the actual review. So
I agree.
Matter of fact, I think probably just particularly on YouTube and stuff like that, we don't care if it's hate watches. Just come and watch it. Yeah.
Negative comments are still feeding the algorithm, so give us all your hate.
Absolutely. So let's go ahead and broaden the conversation.
Yeah, and if you want to hear more, make sure that you subscribe to the podcast and follow us on all the social medias: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Discord, and YouTube.
That's right. And one quick way that you can help support the podcast, just very quick and it's free, is to just rate and review us on iTunes or wherever you listen. People tend to choose podcasts that have recent reviews that are positive, where people are telling the listener, hey, you should check this out because such and such.
Yeah.
That's really helpful. It doesn't get us any more anything except perhaps some more downloads and bringing more people into the discussion. Or if you're willing to put some doubloons down, if you will, you can support us financially.
Be
Patreon.
shillings.
Shillings. I don't know. I don't even know what a doubloon
Whatever
is.
they were using.
I'm using all kinds of words I don't know.
Yes, donating at least $1 per month will make you a patron saint. This gives you special access to an exclusive Facebook group and an exclusive channel in the public Discord server. And it allows you to vote on future episodes like this one that we just covered, which was a Patreon pick.
Yeah.
Right. I keep forgetting that because oftentimes when it's a Patreon pick, I feel a little like almost behind the eight ball, if you will. I'm like, oh yeah, I got to find stuff. With this one, it's like, oh, I'm so glad they let us loose on it.
Oh yeah. We've been waiting a long time.
Years. This has been years in the making for the Patreons.
Eric, did you nominate this one this time or the previous times?
I don't. This time, yes. I've nominated multiple times, but there's been a couple times where someone else has nominated before I have. Matter of fact, I think Maddie may have nominated at one time.
I may have.
I could actually be confused. She could have nominated this time.
I think all of us at some point probably did nominate it because we all apparently love it so much. So it wouldn't surprise me.
There you go. Perfect. And so, yeah, basically join us in the Patreon community and you can vote on future episodes. And sometimes, you get to have input, even if you're not voting directly on the episode. Sometimes we just casually like, hey, we're not sure which thing to cover. And so you get even more say in what we cover on the podcast. And so, yeah, there's certainly more discussion to be had. And so join us in the Facebook group, in the Discord server. Like we said, all of those excellent places to continue the conversation. And wherever it is that you're doing, whether it's here or on the far side of the world, keep engaging media from a godly worldview. And remember that you are not a mindless consumer.